Can you still hear me?
Yep.
I just muted myself on one of the streams. Should I not do that?
No, I think you should be okay.
So yes, unmute.
Yes.
Unmuting now. Do I have an echo?
So that's okay. All right. Hello, everyone. We're having a little technical challenges with Instagram, but that's okay. Thank you so much for joining us. This is Comics for All, where comics, creativity, and community all connect. Today is Thursday, February 19th, 2026. My name is Jameson. I am your host here at Comics for All, a comics librarian. As part of our weekly Ink and Insight segment, we have the wonderful, Trevor Mueller here with us. Trevor, thank you so much for joining us and taking some time out of your schedule. It's great to see you.
Yeah, hey, thanks so much for having me on. It's always great to talk to comic fans, librarians, people who love reading. I'm in.
I think the easiest way to fix the feedback, I just need to get myself a pair of headphones. I think it'll stop that. But thank you so much for coming on. And the question I like to ask everyone to start us off is kind of what hooked you into comics as a reader?
Well, I've been reading comic books ever since I was a little kid. Probably the Archie comic books from the spinner racks at the grocery stores because I'm old and that's how you used to get your comic books before you went to your local comic book shop. And Archie at the time had a lot of different titles, not just Archie comics. They had Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Zen the Intergalactic Ninja, and they had a plethora of other titles that I would always pick up. And I learned a love of comics and reading from there. And as one does when you are interested in a visual medium, I started really quickly creating my own comic books, usually on lined pieces of paper. And I would staple those together and occasionally try to sell them. My mom would buy them for like 50 cents or $1 or whatever, because that was a lot of money back then for a kid. And I just used those to go out and buy more comic books. So it became this self-fulfilling cycle of creating and consuming comics all the time. So started at a very, very young age. And then eventually, discovered an LCS. I think I had a babysitter take me to a local comic book shop. And the very first comic book that I bought, I still have it actually. It's on my wall somewhere. It's a Leonardo number 1 of 1 first print of the original Eastman Laird series of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And I got that, and I got a Flaming Carrot comic because I was like, Flaming Carrot, that sounds cool.
Yeah, it
and
does.
at the time, I remember liking it.
And sorry for the echo, folks. We are trying to work on it, but as someone who works in the creative realm, in the creative comics community, when did you have the realization for yourself that you're like, I actually want to be creative and make this, my career and my thing?
Yeah, well, I went to a Wizard World Chicago. I'd gone to a whole bunch of comic book conventions and met and rubbed elbows with creators and whatnot. And I remember going to a Wizard World Chicago one year saying, I'm going to learn what it takes to be on the other side of the table. I want to figure out what it would take for me to do that. And I went there with the intention of meeting creators who looked to be at a beginner level or had been doing this for a little bit of time and just picking their brains. And I was lucky enough to find 2 gentlemen who were working for DC Comics at the time on their young readers line, who took me under their wing and agreed to mentor me and helped me turn webcomics, which I was making at the time, into printed comic books. And so I was doing probably 2 webcomics that were both updating 2 to 3 times a week during college, on top of my class load and everything else that I was doing at the same time. And ended up making about a 54-page black and white story, because I knew black and white would be cheaper to print, with the intention of actually printing it into like a little mini digest size, like a manga sized book. And figured out all of the intricacies of self-publishing and how to actually take that comic book from my computer screen and put it into a physical copy that I could hold in my hands. And these 2 gentlemen that I was hanging out with, Josh Elder and Russell Lissau, were kind enough to help get me a table as a guest spot at my first convention, which was a tiny little anime con that doesn't exist anymore called Reactor Con. And probably, 50 people showed up to this entire convention, but I was giddy as a clam because, it's my first time actually being on that side of the table and trying to sell my book. And I remember looking over at my buddy Russell and asking him, is there a more satisfying feeling than putting your blood, sweat, and tears into telling a story and being able to hold it in your hand? And he looked at me and he said, yes, there is. Seeing that same book in somebody else's hand while they're waiting in line to buy it from you. And he was not wrong. And ever since then, I have just been hooked on the creator side of telling stories and making comics.
All right. Sorry for the delay on that, just making sure my microphones are off. But I love that. That's a great connection in terms of, especially, hearing about the con that doesn't exist anymore. That makes me a little sad. But the fact that you were able to experience something like that at a small convention. Another reader-centric question that I like to ask everybody is, what is something you've read fairly recently? Didn't have to come out recently necessarily, but that's really stuck with you. Can be indie or major or both, if you've got recommendations for both.
Oh yeah, well, I mostly read a lot of stuff that my friends are working on. I'll give you three things. So one from a webtoon series, my buddy Justin Jordan has an amazing series called Urban Animal, which Rocket Ship has been collecting into collected editions for each of his seasons. There's 2 books out so far. And that's like a superhero horror-ish kind of story about a young boy who discovers that he's actually not just a chimera and can turn into animals, but he's the king of all chimera. And so there's a bit of like a body horror element to it with like the superhero element to it. And it checks a lot of boxes for me. And Justin Amore, his artist on that, also just does an amazing job on the series. And I really, really enjoy that one. I think he's got one more season left to do on Webtoon, but they've got a lot of catching up that they can do yet in their print books. East of West was this little gem that I remember discovering and really, really enjoyed. And it's one of the few books that I own in exclusively hardcover omnibus collections. And those collections are just wonderful and fantastic. And I remember going into my LCS because I always ask them, like, what's something new that I should read? And they were like, East of West, buy this book. Don't get the single issues. Don't get the trade. Get the hardcover. We have some in stock. And I trust my LCS, so I did. And they were not wrong. And that book was absolutely amazing. I own all 3 volumes, and I really, really enjoy it. And then something that's just kind of tickling the primal side of my brain lately is Way of the House Husband. It's a cozy manga series about a retired Yakuza who essentially is doing household chores and tackling them like they are assassin jobs for the mob. So like he walks into a grocery store like he's going to shake the place down, and he's goes up to the owner, gets really, really close to him and goes, you got that white powder? And what he's talking about is baking soda, because baking soda will help him get all of the stains off of his stainless steel pans at home. And reading this series, one, it's cute, it's funny, it's hilarious. 2, I've actually learned a lot about housework from it. And it has helped me maintain my pots and pans at home. And so like this weird pseudo like entertaining educational component to it that I've really enjoyed. So Way of the House Husband has been one that I've been collecting quite recently.
Yeah, shout out Way of the House Husband and East of West. I absolutely love. I read it years ago when the trades came out before the hardcovers. And shout out Nick Dragotta. Nick Dragotta is like one of the like top tier artists right now out there. So for viewers out there new to your work, how do you introduce yourself as a creator? What all do you get to do in the comics world?
Well, my name is Trevor, and I get to do the writing, which means that I get to work with artists around the world who make my words look pretty on the page. Usually, when I'm at a convention and I invite people over, I'm usually holding a sign that says, "May I tell you about my comics?" And when they come over and approach, I ask the question, "What do you like to read?" Because my mission as a creator is to try to have something for everyone on my table. I have a lot of different genres. I started off, again, publishing. Well, the very first book that I did, that black and white story that I did, was probably for teenagers. But I cut my teeth on doing a young readers adventure series called Albert the Alien that got nominated for 2 Harvey Awards. It was the first young readers syndicated series on Mark Waid's Thrillbent website. And we used Kickstarter to self-publish and fund 4 graphic novels worth of stories for Albert. So there's something like 600 pages across 4 collections of that book. And as we worked on that series for about 5 to 6 years, kids who started off reading it at the age of 10 came up to me, now 15 and 16, and said, "I'm too old for this now. What do you got for me that's next?" And I didn't have anything for them because I was working on the next Albert the Alien, right? And that started to teach me an important lesson about trying to tap into my own inner likes and needs and challenging myself as a creator to try to flex different types of muscles and to try to put as much variety on the table with stories that I'm passionate about and characters that I enjoy, but that either hit different boxes in terms of age or hit different boxes in terms of genre. And so now I probably have something like a dozen or so titles on my table when you come up to me at a convention. I'm still missing straight romance. And I have not finished a high fantasy story yet, but I'm getting there. But the books that I'm doing right now for Paper Cuts are actually a return to young readers' stories for me. And that's been really, really fun because I very much subscribe to the song written by Linda Kaplan Thayer, "I don't want to grow up, I'm a Toys R Us kid," because I never got out of, being a child in heart and in mind. And so being able to tell those types of stories for those types of readers is always a joy for me. And so, again, a little something for everyone on the table, depending on what you like to read.
Absolutely. And I feel like that's a really underappreciated aspect of being a creator, as like you mentioned, to have something for everyone who does approach your table. If you're in person, especially, that you have something that is of interest to a variety of readers, which is really important. So, kind of what does your average creative work week look like here for the next month or two? I know we're going to be talking about your title with Paper Cuts here in just a moment. Kind of what else, like you mentioned, just having to tackle and try to promote the book that's coming out and everything else. What does your average day look like?
It's a lot of writing. Writing is a 9 to 5 job. I had a day job, and I ended up focusing on comics full time. Put 5 years into my last company that I was at, working in global marketing. They had a series of layoffs, and unfortunately, I was caught up in that. And looked at the wife and was like, "I'm a bit burned out. Wouldn't mind a change of pace. What do you say we try to do this thing full time and see what happens?" And thankfully, I'd built up enough reputation and clout over the years to be able to have a couple of jobs lined up, not just self-published work that I was paying to end up making, and enough editors and enough enough editors in my network who were looking for writers and willing to take a shot on me, which I very, very much appreciated. So, what a typical day looks like for me is getting up, getting the kids out the door and on the bus, and then going and writing. And you're writing 9 to 5, Monday through Saturday or Sunday. Sometimes you're writing after 5, but my kids are home at that point, so I got to take a break to get them dinner and whatnot. And you're constantly writing. Even when I had a day job and I was commuting downtown, going and writing on the train commute was the most productive 45 minutes that I had ever had in my life. There's no internet, there's no distractions, there's nothing that can keep you from sitting down and staring at that page and working on it. And the process that I've kind of put in place for myself helps me to make sure that I don't delay, that I don't dawdle, that I don't stare at a blank page for too long, that I've got things on there to keep building up from and to keep the momentum going so that I can start strong. And if I could today, I would hop on a train for 9 to 5 and just write the whole time because, again, no distractions, nothing to stop you from just sitting there and churning out pages. In a 45-minute commute, I was able to knock out 4 to 8 pages at a time, or a full webtoon episode, at least a first draft, in those windows. So I try to be as efficient as humanly possible, and that also allows me to juggle a lot of different projects, especially when my editor is so generously giving me a variety of different things. Paper Cuts has announced 2 of the titles that I'm working on. Bat Pat, which they just announced, has a second volume coming out later this year, and then the Secret S.T.E.A.M Society, which I know we'll be talking about here as well, of which they've announced 2 books that I'm doing out of the 3 books in that series so far: Horses and Music. There are a lot of other books that I'm working on right now that have not been announced yet, and I'm under NDA, so I can't really talk about them. But let's just say that there's enough work there to keep me busy, and a long enough deadline or through line, I should say, on there, where you're probably not going to hear about the books for a good 6, 12, 18 months, depending on the title and where we're at in the process. At the same time, I have friends that are actors because I've been in the convention scene for so long, and I just helped one of my former Power Ranger actor buddies make his first movie. And he just won a whole bunch of film festival awards for it, and now he's seeking distribution for the movie. So if you're a former Power Rangers fan and you want to see him try to do something different that isn't Power Rangers, we were working on that movie with Johnny Young Bosch. And again, just a very, very blessed to have the opportunity to flex a new muscle and try something new. And again, it keeps me writing and telling stories. And at the end of the day, the thing that I love, the thing that sustains me, is storytelling.
100%. And I feel like that really comes across in your writing and your projects. So now the time, we're all here to talk about this particular title, Secret S.T.E.A.M Society, Horses, as you mentioned. Was it a world, a character, or the theme that kind of pulled you in? What pulled you into this project to be like, what, I want to do this?
Well, step one, my editor ended up making a post on social media saying, I'm looking for writers that know how to write for young readers, preferably with educational background. Can you help? And I reached out and I was like, yeah, hello. That was how I got started. Because the Albert the Alien books, or the character, appeared in the Reading with Pictures anthologies, which was an educational nonprofit that my buddy Josh Elder started, which was trying to leverage comic books as educational materials, but still allow them to be fun, entertaining, and accessible to young readers. Not a lecture, not a lesson, but kind of playfully put education into a type of story. And so he was launching this new line, Secret S.T.E.A.M Society. It didn't even have a name yet, but he had a Bible of characters that he wanted to use for it. He had concepts. It's kind of a Magic School Bus inspired type of story where there's education, there's entertainment. It's a heavy focus on the adventure to, again, make sure that these are stories that young readers want to read and they have fun reading. And so going through all those elements with him, picking out the characters from his roster that I think would kind of fit the best, he told me he wanted the first book to be an animal book. And he was like, what's your favorite animal? And I don't have a favorite animal, but my youngest daughter's favorite animal is horses. And I didn't know anything about horses. And I was like, this is a great opportunity for me to learn and take the excitement that I have through my learning process and apply that into a story, because the story is essentially about one of the students not knowing about horses, and they're big. They're big animals. They're powerful. They can be intimidating. And it's through the act of learning about horses that they become demystified to her and less scary. And she starts to learn how to get comfortable around them and how to learn to ride them by the end of the story. And I really liked that idea. I really liked that notion. And as I was reading books from the library online, I had a very strict bibliography we were maintaining for this book, because we had not just the editorial team doing checks on us from a story perspective, but we also had an academic team that was doing checks on us from a factual perspective to make sure that what was in there is indeed accurate. I'm not a horse expert. They are. And so they could come in and sit there and say, oh, wait, that's not actually true. Or wait a minute, you should read this reference material instead and try to lift something from that. And so as I learned about horses, I was just discovering all of these fun facts, and I was building my story around this idea of fun facts. Like, I didn't know that. Oh, I thought that was a really cool idea. I wonder if other people would know that too. And as I started to build that up into my outline and pitching that stuff back to the editor, he was like, everything that you were putting together on this list is new information to me, sounds fun and amazing, and also seems to be very visual and accessible to the audience that we were after. So it was a fun way to kind of build out a new series with them that I don't own. But I get to play in that world and I get to play with these characters and I get to learn about a topic while I am building a story around that topic to teach people around that topic. And I just think that entire concept is fun, inventive, unique, and again, hopefully a fun adventure story too that kids want to read. That was always the goal.
Absolutely. And honestly, I think this is a type of book that will really thrive in the library world. I think this is kind of the titles that the library market especially needs. They're the educational components, and kind of like you were talking about, are there any real life inventors, scientists, or educators that kind of inspire some of the themes that you want to talk about, like during your research?
Yeah, I don't know that there's a particular researcher or academic or professor that had inspired it. Again, it was really kind of driven by my daughter. But I will say that both of my biological parents are teachers. So
Okay.
teaching is a bit in the blood, if you will. And the idea of being able to learn about it, I subscribe to the idea that the best way to learn is to teach. And so if I can understand a concept well enough to tell you about it, or heaven forbid, write a story about it, um, then that helps me to really understand that topic in a way that is much more profound than just reading a book about it or watching a documentary about it. And again, it's really helped me connect with my daughter on with these particular animals. And since I have written the book, she's actually started writing lessons, and to see some of the things that I put into that book kind of manifest in the activities that she does, because she's not just riding the horses, like she's grooming the horses, she's helping to feed the horses, she's doing all the stall and the groundwork with them, she's putting on the bridles and the parts of the saddle. And so to be like, oh wait, I wrote about that, I know what the parts of the saddle are, is really, really fun and fulfilling, and also allows me to kind of see the practical application of some of the content that we put into that book, which to me was a really important element. I didn't just want to put stuff in there for academic sake. I wanted it to be things like, if you are very much interested in this topic, if you really like horses, you need to know this information. You need to know how a horse is measured, what the different breeds of horses are, what the differences are between them, how horses communicate. And it's very, very funny to kind of see the temperament of some of the horses in the stable that she goes to. She's going to a stable that has 60 odd some horses, and she doesn't have just one that she's assigned to. She gets to ride a variety of them, and some of them are very friendly, and some of them are a little bit more ornery, and some of them get a little hangry when it's time to get fed and she's trying to ride them. And it's quite funny just to see the differences in their personalities and how they communicate. And again, that was all research that I did in there, and things that we ended up putting into the book to kind of showcase that information to people who may be less familiar with horses, and how they communicate, or how to ride them, or how to talk to them. And again, just something that to me was kind of validating when it came to the content that we were putting together in the story after the fact.
I love that. Actually, having that creative kind of coherence of events really is a fun thing to hear about. My next question is, and this is actually a good question for maybe the parents or the people interested in picking up the book. And actually, when is the release date for the book for everybody out there?
I think it's coming out the 21st. I think it's coming out pretty soon this month. So Horses comes out this month, and then the other one that I did for them, Music's coming out in April.
April, excellent.
Yeah.
And this is actually kind of like I said, a good question for more of the parents. But how do you balance the educational message of the STEAM components of the event plus the adventure tone, like you mentioned, so it doesn't feel like a lesson in disguise?
For any story that I work on, you always start with character. And so for me, it was, who are the characters that we want to use? They had created a roster of about a dozen different kids with all very diverse backgrounds, different interests, different passions, different things that kind of drive them. And so there's a character, you can see him on the cover there in the background, named George, who's wearing the vest. And so George is a very outdoorsy kind of adventurous character. And so to me, it made sense that he might have his own horse or be very knowledgeable about horses. And then Thea, who's in the foreground there, is less adventurous. She's a little bit more of a bookworm, a little bit more of a science geek. And so to have those two kind of juxtapose each other within the story, and to have one be able to kind of teach the other one, but also to have topics where she can also turn the tide and teach him about things, right, that he might not have known about biology or about farming, right, like what to do with horse manure and how that stuff works. All of those topics get covered within the story. So for me, it all started off with character, and we do a bit of setup within the story. We introduce the conflict as quickly as we possibly can, and every now and then we're peppering in more adventurous activities for the kids to go on. So even though they might like learn about horse biology, they're not learning about it by being lectured to in a classroom. They're using alien technology and shrinking down and going inside the horse's body. Because you'll also see there's a character in the background who's riding on a floating mechanical horse named Toot. And Toot is kind of this secret alien student at the school that only the Secret S.T.E.A.M society knows about, and they have access to some of his alien technology that allow them to do things like shrink down or go back or forward in time or go deep into space. And so with that technology, they don't just have to sit there in a classroom and learn about the evolution of horses over the centuries, right? They can go back in time and actually see it. And then they can get chased by a dinosaur or something, right? And so we can throw in fun facts, fun adventure, fun elements that the kids go through throughout the story. And honestly, because this is the first book in there, that was a big point of conversation that the editor and I had quite a bit was, well, how much danger do we potentially want the kids to be in, right? Like, what is the tone that we want to set with that? I think the original pitch for this at some point was like, what if the horse like steals the time travel device and goes back in time and inadvertently creates a wormhole that starts to collapse space-time and they've got to rush to get back to our time to finish it. And he's like, yeah, no, too intense. Like we don't need that much tension in there. But we can have a fun balance between tension, drama, danger, but also, again, focused on adventure. And then also, again, the educational components to balance it out. So it's something that we were looking at. It's something that from a pacing standpoint, we spent a lot of time on. And from the early reviews that we've been seeing in, it seems like we've struck the right balance of educational content and story, character, and adventure in there. So I'm proud of that. Bless all the people that gave us those reviews.
That's great to hear, actually. And that really actually goes right into my next question, which you maybe have already answered. But is there any particular storytelling techniques or pacing tricks you're using when you're kind of writing for this middle grade reader, that the 12-year-old range?
I don't know that there's a pacing technique or trick or anything, but for me, it's, the first 5-ish pages are probably about setup because it's introducing the characters to readers. The idea with Secret S.T.E.A.M Society is that even though it's a series of books, like you can read them in any order. So like an episode of a TV show, you can jump in and you've got to get an introduction to who these characters are, what their motivations and interests are, and what the climax is, or sorry, not the climax, what the inciting incident is that kicks off the adventure that starts the story. And you've got to do all that in about the span of about 5 pages, right? So in my mind, that's where we started to introduce some of the educational components. And then it's peppering in ever so often more adventure ideas, more drama or danger components in there that keep the story fun and interesting, or a joke. Like, again, we've got a lot of fart jokes in there because horse manure and methane production and all those things, right? It's educational, but it's also funny. And then we've got something like a bookend at the end of the story that kind of wraps up the tale and allows them to have the denouement and the character arc that concludes that story. And there's no to be continued at the end. There's nothing there that sits there and carries over in any other book, which gives autonomy to the various creators that are on there. Again, out of the 3 books they've announced, I've written 2 of them, but that means that there's a 3rd book that I didn't write. And so that writer doesn't need to know what I've done with my story and vice versa. And in fact, in some of the stories that I've written for them, for the Secret S.T.E.A.M Society as well, I actually have them sometimes run into kids that are on other adventures because I thought that idea was fun and funny. And again, it kind of operates similar to how we are working as writers, where the tie that binds is the editor, and the editor knows what everyone's working on. And that way I don't have to know what they're working on. If there's an element in this story about space and they've got another book about space, he can sit there and say, hey, we don't need 5 pages on that topic because we've got a whole book that's coming out about that. Maybe cut that down to 2 pages. And that's been very freeing for me as well, so that I know, again, how to kind of pace that story and how long to potentially linger on a particular topic and how much emphasis to put on that topic when it comes to the adventurous elements of the story as well. So it's been a collaborative process, but I wouldn't say that there's necessarily been like a hard and fast rule that we have used to try to figure out how to place all that together. It's a little bit of instinct, a little bit of art.
That's totally fair. Yeah, I really think it's, like I said, this is a title that is really kind of necessary and needed in the library realm for sure. My next question is kind of on your, standing on your own laurels and kind of tooting your own horn a little bit. Is there a moment in this horse's title where you're like, you know what? I'm firing on all cylinders and I'm doing some excellent work here?
I mean, you always hope that that's the case, but it's not until the book gets released and you start to see what the critical reception of it is that you understand, like, oh, do people really like me, or do I have imposter syndrome and it's actually validated? I think that what excited me about the story again was the opportunity to learn about a topic so thoroughly that I was going to be able to tell a story about it and inform people about it. And there were things in there that even my editor had no idea would potentially be linked to horses that we included. For me, there were a couple of key elements that I thought were very important to include, which were like jobs with horses, right? Which are things that I think kids would be very interested to learn about. Not, my 7-year-old thinks that she's going to grow up and be a cowgirl and just ride horses for a living. But there's more jobs involved than just that, right? Like there are ranch hands, there are ranch owners, there are people who create horse food and distribute horse food. So there's marketing for animal foods. There's veterinarians. I didn't realize that horses have dentists. And so you can be a horse dentist and all that metallurgical work for horseshoe making and all that stuff. So I wanted to kind of showcase again the broad spectrum of horse-related jobs, both directly and indirectly, in working with the animals and working with areas that the animals touch or exist or live. And that hopefully helps to inspire the kids to be like, this isn't just an animal that I can ride and enjoy, but this can also be a lifestyle and a career. And there are many people in our country and beyond our country who do enjoy careers working with horses, that make a living working with this majestic animal. But not everyone necessarily gets that exposure and knows that those types of jobs are out there. So long answer to a short question that kind of answers your question. Like for me, when we started to get into those parts, when the editorial team was very open and receptive to including that type of practical information within here that not just informs the reader about horses, but inspires them about a potential career that they could have with the animal, that's when I knew that I was working on a project that was very, very special. And the other book that we're not talking about today, but that they've announced so far, music, right? Like that was also an important part because I can't sing. I can't play an instrument. I'm never going to be a front man in a band. My background is in marketing, and there are agents, there are managers, there are marketing companies, there are record companies, there are venue managers, right? There are a whole plethora of jobs attached to the musical career that don't necessarily involve playing an instrument. And again, that was an element too that I wanted to make sure was included within that book, not necessarily repeating the same pacing and structure of the horses book and where we put it in there, but the idea to, again, inspire the fact that there is a lifestyle and a career that can happen here. And it's probably not all just the in front of your face, low hanging fruit that you think it is. Again, probably a long answer to your question, but that's when I started to get excited, is when we got that type of detail into the story, which again inspires beyond the book itself and allows that book to kind of live on in your brain rent free.
100%. And it's really great that that is a component of the book, because I didn't even think about that, having the different career options as a part of it, so the kids and the readers can see themselves as potentially doing those. And for the viewers out there, I know we got a couple on Instagram. I did put the Paper Cuts URL for the book in the chat, so if you want to go check out the website, you totally can. My next question is kind of more of a creative process on the back end for yourself. What tools or kind of workflow software, or what are you using to kind of stay on top of a project like this, where you're having to do research, your storytelling, how do you keep yourself organized while you're working on something like this?
So because this has a lot of different hands that touch it, we've got our editorial team, we've got our artist, we've got our colorist, we've got a letterer, we've got an academic. Sometimes there are multiple editors that will come in and help fact check and story edit elements in here. I needed collaborative tools, but I'm also frugal and I don't like to spend a lot of money. So Google Docs tends to be a default program for me that allows easy access to sharing with different permission levels for each of those users to either just view, comment, or actually be able to edit directly. And I can also take that on the go, because I usually just write on my iPad with a little magnetic keyboard attached to it. And whenever I think of notes and things like that, I can access it on my phone when I'm walking around, and I can sit there and type in a note, or I can put in a bibliography piece when I'm at the library with my kids and I've got 5 minutes, and I can sneak over to the animal section and be like, wait, that's another fun fact. I didn't include that. Can we fit that in on page 7? Right? Like I can do that kind of stuff within that type of tool that makes it very, very easy. In terms of process, I tend to be a plotter, right? Like there's kind of a spectrum of writers. There's plotters and there's pantsers. Plotters are people who tend to do more of an outlined structure to their stories beforehand, whereas pantsers tend to kind of fly by the seat of their pants a little bit more, and there tends to be a little less rigmarole behind theirs. There's pros and cons to both types of writing, but on that spectrum, I tend to lean more towards the plotter side. And because of that, I actually think that benefits me quite well for 2 reasons. One, when working with the editorial team, it allows me to put together kind of the vision at a macro level and then start to get down to that micro tactical level, because I go through this process of essentially saying, like, here are the topics that we're going to cover. Okay, here's how many pages we're probably going to spend on each of those topics. Okay, here's how that actually breaks down into a page by page outline for this book. And these are meaty books. They're 118 to 122 pages, depending on the volume. So there's a lot of content in there. And it's important for me to get that feedback early, because if there's a change that an editor wants, if I've got 5 pages dedicated to space and I only need 2, I want to know that in the outline stage, not the scripting stage, right? Because that way I don't have to re-edit a whole bunch of my work. It, burns a bunch of hours that I don't necessarily have. And so editorial seems to have responded very, very positively to that type of approach. And then to what we were talking about earlier about why I'm as productive as I am on the train, that means that I'm never staring at a blank page, because I already have an outline to look at, or a bibliography to reference, or notes that I've made to myself about what I want to do on this page, what the adventure is, or what the joke is, or what the fun facts are. And I can just sit there and start typing that in and turning that into an actual script format. And I can do it on the go, and I can do it in a collaborative way. And it's worked really, really well for me. And that also allows me to juggle multiple projects with multiple editors. Again, I was doing 2 Webtoon original series at the same time as well, with editorial teams. And again, could just go through a very similar process of like, this is what the season of 50 episodes is going to look like. and here's how we trickle that down into an episode by episode breakdown. And so here's how we're kind of pacing throughout. And okay, now I'm going to start writing the first 5 episodes. It's worked quite well for me. Again, I know there are pros and cons to those types of approaches that are on there, but it's one that's allowed me to be able to juggle a variety of different projects at once, keep editorial apprised on what's going on, get that necessary feedback early from editorial, and allow me to use collaborative software that is not restrictive in any way, but
Right.
still allows us to get all the inputs that we need from the various stakeholders they're going to be in, whether they're there at the beginning or whether they're not. When we started this project, we didn't have an artist attached right away. It took us a couple of weeks. And so we were working, I was probably 12 to 20 pages into the story before they ended up finding an artist and actually attaching them on there. And so the opportunity to get to work with the artist as well once they were found was a novel approach as well within that process. Not all publishers will do that. Like there are writers at DC where the artist and the writer never actually meet. The editor just kind of takes that script and then translates it in whatever way the artist potentially needs it to. And there's no tailoring that script to the artist's needs. With this book, we discovered as we went on that because we were referencing real world places or biological components of a horse or all those, a lot of reference images were kind of needed. And the books that I was checking out at my library weren't necessarily available at my artist's library. And so we had to come up with a process of how do we make sure that they've got access to the same images that I'm looking at. Either I'm taking pictures of it and I'm putting it in the bibliography, or it's in the outline, or it's in the script. And eventually we just went with putting it all in the script. And so our scripts for these books, even though they're 118-ish written pages or printed pages, the script itself is like 400, 500 pages because there's so many different reference images and things that are in there and start to bulk up a lot of the pages so that the artist is armed with enough variety of what we're trying to do that they can sit there and make it their own, and put it in their own style and what they want to do with the book. So again, another long answer to a short question. Apologies on that one, but it's I think the collaborative software and that plotting kind of approach has worked out pretty well, especially for this series, and especially because we have so many different stakeholders that need to be involved in it.
That's right. And I think it's as complicated as it can be to create comics. I feel like when you have that kind of synergy and people are working well together and things are going well, these types of books are so important. I'm really happy these are coming out. So props to you guys and the team. This is kind of more of a question for you in your career and kind of cool experiences. Has there been any fan or reader feedback that you've received that either took you by surprise, you're like, oh, or just a perspective you didn't see before?
No, again, I think the one I referenced earlier about the readers aging up and looking for the next thing.
Yes.
There's that want and desire among fans and readers to continue to support the creators that they fell in love with at a young age. And so therefore there's incentive as a creator to make sure that I've got enough variety on my table in terms of genre, in terms of reading level. And I was not prepared for that at the time. I really enjoyed writing kids comics. And I probably had some older stories in me, but didn't have any incentive to do it until that reader came up. And then all of a sudden I'm writing 2 teen books for Webtoon. I just had my first LGBT graphic novel come out from Arledge Press.
Excellent.
I just self-published last year and the year before my first 2 mature readers graphic novels. And again, these are all things I shopped around to publishers. They were like, we don't know how to market this. I was like, I got the exact same thing with Albert the Alien, and Albert the Alien won me 2 Harvey Awards. So I know that it's, I believe in myself enough to be able to do it. And have something new on my table every single year when people come back to see me, because again, they want to kind of do that support. And I want to make sure that they've got something new to check out that's hopefully going to be at the age level or the genre that they like, so that they'll keep coming back. I'd say that's the one that has impacted my career the most, is just that feedback of what's next.
Yes.
And that's kept me thirsty as a writer to continue to challenge myself, not just in terms of writing for different ages, but different genres, different
Yes.
types of storytelling techniques, um, different formats, right? Like Webtoon is a vertical scroll, is a very different format than the printed page,
Yeah.
and now movie scripts, and that's also again a very different animal to kind of tackle, but one that keeps me invigorated when it comes to telling stories, which again is what I love.
Excellent. And speaking of conventions, what are the conventions you're going to be at coming up the next couple months?
Yeah, my first one this year will be C2E2. So I'll be at that one. Chicago's my hometown, so that's a local show for me.
Nice.
I've got a couple of library shows that I'm doing in between that and the next one. Oh, I can't remember which one comes next, if it's ALA or if it's Heroes Con. But I'll be returning to Heroes Con again, which is one of my favorite shows over in Charlotte. It's a wonderful, wonderful convention and just such a fun time. Fan Expo Chicago, I'll be a guest at that one again as well. And
Nice.
then we're waiting to hear back on a few more conventions as to whether or not I'll be able to return to some of those or even some new ones in the list. I used to do a lot of conventions. I used to do like 22 a year, and that's a lot.
Yeah, it
Now
is.
I do maybe 5, maybe 8, because again I got littles at home, and time spent at the convention is unfortunately time spent away from them, and I do not want to miss their youth. I love my girls. My girls are an inspiration, and they keep invigorating me to tell these types of stories, especially for young readers out there. And I want to capitalize on that while they're still young, because when they hit the teenager stage, then everything I do is going to be terrible and awful, and they're just going to hate me.
Everything's gonna be cringe, as they say.
Right.
Uh, so I know you said you can't say too much, but what can you share? At least what you can talk about. What else you're working on for the rest of this year?
Yeah. So we've got more Bat Pack coming. We've got more Secret S.T.E.A.M Society coming. I don't know when they'll announce them. I can't talk about the titles yet, but if you go to Goodreads, they've already announced a few of them incidentally on Goodreads. Um, and and I can't talk about all the other titles yet. There's a couple of original stories I'm doing with some licensed characters. There's a few adaptations of some Netflix animated series that I'm working on at the moment. And then more creator-owned stuff that I'm trying to pitch around and see if we can find a publishing home for them. But if not, I will end up self-publishing those. And then we're also trying to get some book deals for my webtoons right now too. One of them
Right.
just completed, and so that one, I think season 1 of that is now past the exclusivity window that we have with the platform, so we can start to move it over to other media. And then I'm finishing up my other webtoon series, Nexus Point, which updates on Saturdays. But it's a cyberpunk action story about hackers fighting bounty hunters. So
Oh, sweet. That
yeah.
sounds great. Uh, where can people find you online and follow along with what you're working on?
Yeah, Trevor A. Mueller, one word. So my name with the letter A in the middle, one word, is me on all the social platforms. I'm on Blue Sky, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter,
Threads.
Threads,
Yeah.
everything. Yeah, find me, follow me, friend me. My website, trevoramueller.com. I have a newsletter on there that you can sign up for at trevoramueller.com/newsletter. And that comes out monthly as well. I am very accessible, although I don't post online as much as I would like to, because again, I'm a little too busy writing the scripts.
That's totally fair. Yeah. Well, I understand family does come first, 100%. So my last question to close us out is a fun one, but do you have a favorite snack or a meal as a go-to when you need to sit down and power yourself through a couple hours?
Yeah, I think there's two. One of them's definitely healthier than the other one. Protein helps to fill the belly and keep you from getting the munchies later on. So I usually have like a little bowl of nuts next to me. And sometimes I go bad boy and I get like some candied pecans. So it's filling the
Okay.
protein need and like sweet and savory kind of a mix. But when I'm absolutely ignoring health restrictions, Sour Patch Kids
Oh,
become
yes.
my go-to. They're my travel snack. They're my writing snack. Whenever I have this weird craving for something sweet, for some reason, it's always Sour Patch Kids. I don't know why. And sometimes you'll see me snacking on them at conventions every now and then too. And I just need a little like pick me up and a little like, ooh, because it has that sweet and sour component to it, which I like too. Mixing flavors. I feel like that's like a definition for my career. Like mixing genres, mixing flavors is a thing that I do enjoy.
Yeah, so that's a great way to put your work for sure. Well, Trevor, thank you so much again for coming on the show. It's been a great conversation, and everybody, I hope you get to check out his work. Does a great job, doing all kinds, like he mentioned, different writing of different genres, different age groups. And Trevor, is there any last thoughts you'd like to share before we head out?
No, please pre-order Secret S.T.E.A.M Society at your local comic book shop, bookstore. You can get it off of Paper Cut's website directly.
Ask your library to buy it.
Whatever your preferred format or platform is to get it. If you find me at a convention, bring the book. I will sign it for you for free. Yes. But yes, please, please, please share it with your friends, your family, your teachers, your librarians, anything and everything that we can do to get the word out about this brand new series and this brand new line that Paper Cuts has done. The more successful it is, it means the more books we get to make, which means I get to learn about more topics, and that makes me very excited. So please, please, please check it out. And thank you so much to the people who've already pre-ordered it and to the people who support young readers' comic books. Thank you.
That's right. And I feel like it's a really important age group to get the comics reading, because once they start reading that, they will never stop reading comics ever again. So that's facts. So everybody out there, thank you for joining Comics for All once again. This has been Comics for All, where comics, creativity, and community all connect. So Trevor, thank you once again, and we'll see you next time. All right.
Thank you, guys. Enjoy.